Hello, everybody, and welcome along to the history program, the Limerick Historical Society. My name is Tony Brown, and I have with me tonight my co-functionary, that's a big long word now, isn't it? Tom Donovan. Tom, you're welcome along anyway.
Thank you, Tony.
And tonight we'd like to welcome along a man that I've known of for quite a few years, and we'll talk later on about some of the books he's written. But I'd like to welcome along Brother John Feheney. John, you're welcome anyway to the program.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Tom.
Now, I should say that you're a presentation brother and the presentation order based at the Maldyke in Cork. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And I'd say you didn't join up the society yesterday, did you?
No, it was a long time ago. A long time ago, and in those days when I joined, Cork was very far away.
Yeah.
A strange thing, we always, in our place, used the term going up to Cork.
Yeah, I can never understand that. To me, it's down to Cork and up to Dublin.
Well, I eventually, I think, found an explanation. And it is in Gaelic, in the Gaelic maps, all the maps of Ireland, you might come across lower Balnacourty and upper Balnacourty.
Balnacourty, yeah.
Now, lower is always on the north side and upper is always on the southern side. Now, Cork is south from Limerick. Hence, by the logic, we should say that we're going up to Cork because it's upper.
I suppose the same applies. One that always confuses me is the River Bann. The lower section to me is the upper Bann, and the one that flows up towards Bushmills and that is the lower Bann. I can never figure that one out.
Well, that follows the same rule.
Yeah, much the same.
Follows the same rule. The northern one is always the lower, and the southern is the upper.
Yeah, well, what would you say, Tom? Would you say down to Cork or up to Cork?
I down.
Yeah,
and,
I would say down.
And by the way, I still think Cork is a long way.
Yeah.
Yes, then.
Yeah. But anyway,
I'd rather drive to Dublin than Cork.
Yeah. We'll talk about that afterwards. Anyway, John, first of all, you're a native of Ballysteen.
Correct.
Where is Ballysteen?
Now, Ballysteen is on the bank of the Shannon, and it is about midway, almost midway between Limerick City and the Shannon estuary back in Kerry. And it's quite a historic area because originally it was part of a little kingdom on its own, that is years and years ago. And the name of there was a special tribe there called the Iverasa. And that was anglicized to Ivorus. And the kind of ancient name in the voting area, there's still kind of an area, Iverus, Iverus, but originally it was the name of a tribe. And that possibly accounts for the fact that Ballysteen always regards itself as a little unit, even though it's part of the parish of Skeeton.
Yes,
and possibly there are historic kind of roots to that idea. Yeah. I don't know what Tom would say about that.
Well, anybody with interest in GA will realize that even though they might be joined, they're definitely separate. You know, it's a bit like Patrickswell and Ballybrown. You know,
indeed.
There is a separate identity between Skeeton and Ballysteen, and you know, no matter how much you try to merge it, I'd say they would always hold their own and identity. You know, but Tony asked me to take out some books belonging to you tonight, John, and I put my hand in, and I have 7 or 8 here, and that's not all the books you've done. You know, the O'Shanassy's of Munster, I was reading it the other day because somebody asked me about the O'Shannassy family in the MP, so I took out your book on that. And then I regularly look at the Good Seed, Fertile Soil, the two books on that, if I want to look up a priest. And then you have the Biographical Dictionary of Askeaton and Ballysteen, and the Barony of Kenry, and then the Nocturnes of Ballycanara, is it?
That's Ballycanara, that's correct.
Yeah.
But and then of course you did the history of Ballysteen.
Indeed.
How did you get interested in history?
Well, one of the reasons was I think it was in my blood, because some of my relatives, one of my uncles especially, was great at tracing family relationships.
Yeah.
And quite young, when I was quite young, I was listening to a lot of this. And I also, we were very good in that area of keeping track of relations.
Yeah.
And these relations would be to be a real extended family, going out third, fourth, fifth generation. So I began with that, with the genealogy.
There was a lot of intermarriage in the Ballysteen area, wasn't there?
There
was a lot
was
of intermarriage between families.
There certainly was. I will say 25 years ago, when I came out of Mass on a Sunday, and all the people, were in little groups chatting, when I looked around, I felt that I was related to practically everybody in the parish. Now, that was through my mother's side, because she was from Ballysteen. My father was from Askeaton, but his family was rather small. So I didn't have as many relations at all on my father's side. But through Ballysteen, I was virtually related to everybody.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it was rather, like nowadays it's easy to drive Ballysteen, but it was rather remote back, say, in the 19th century. I mean, you had to make a trek to anywhere to get out of Ballysteen.
Yeah.
That is great. That is very true.
Yeah.
As regards the intermarriage, there was possibly a geographical reason. On the north side, it was bounded by the Shannon.
Yeah.
On the western side, it was bounded by the Deal.
Yeah.
Now, there were some marriages on the eastern side, say, with people in Kildimo, Pallaskenry, and on the southern side, up towards Adair and Cork and so on. But perhaps the geographical boundaries it was a factor.
Yeah.
But even the names that are associated, names obviously Feheney, also Nocturne, we'll say, for example, there are a few names that you associate with
Gallagher.
Yeah.
Gallagher, yes, correct.
Yeah.
Gallaghers have been there for about at least 200 years.
Yeah.
Not more.
And it's funny,
Chancy, the expression blowings, they originally came down from Galway, the Shannessys, when they were transplanted.
That's correct.
From Galway, from the Gort area down into there. And then the Donovans were pushed westward, back towards beyond the Skeet and back towards Tower Glyn, we'll say, that area. The Donovans were pushed back from their homeland to put in the Shannessys. But there's a fair amount of Shannessys still around the area.
There is in the baptismal register for Askeaton Ballysteen. In fact, I did a count in all the parishes nearest Askeaton Ballysteen, Adair, Pallaskenry, Kildimo, Shannagolden, back to Abbeyfield, Newcastle West, Rathkeil. And of all those parishes, the greatest number of entries in the parish register, both marriages and baptisms, was Shannessy. It's the largest of any, there's no family would compare with it. So there were a lot of them. in, we'll say, in the 19th century and in the first half of the 20th century.
Yeah, yeah.
Then the barony itself is easy to identify. Well, for me, it's very easy to identify the actual barony of Kenry because it's in between both the Deal and the Mag, let's say.
Exactly.
You know, it's very easy to identify. And
It
of course, you get on to my favourite subject then is who owned the lands and who got the lands of the barony.
Indeed. I was doing a little study recently of the distribution of lands in Cork. And one of the things that was immediately obvious was the allocation, we'll say, the holdings of the gentry and aristocracy in Cork would be much larger than in County Limerick. But, of course, there was an added factor. If we take, for instance, back in Glengariff, that area now, there was 95,000 acres, whereas in Limerick, the biggest would be about 25,000.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the fact that the land was better in County Limerick was a factor.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
But on the whole, there weren't huge estates in County Limerick. Say the Earl of Dunraven, he had 14,000 acres. Waller, at maximum, had 9,000 acres. Now, as I said, there were a lot of people then with just about 5,000 acres, especially around Rathkeil.
Yeah. That is
So
true.
it was good land, but the actual size wasn't as large as in some of other counties.
That's true because Cork, I suppose we were talking to Seamus O'Sullivan there, and Courtney had a huge estate because a lot of the land was poor. You know, he got more land.
Exactly.
Because, yeah.
Still, the Wallers, John, had a famous, there's a reported to have been a boast of the Wallers that they farmed from the Shannon to Adair. They were able to farm different pieces of land.
Well, that was literally true.
Yeah.
Because the Waller property did go up near Adair. But as I said, 9,000 acres, wasn't huge in those days.
No.
Now, of course, the Waller family was very influential because when Sir Hardress got into trouble, he was a very shrewd man. So he married his daughters. He had 3 daughters, and then they made what we would call very good marriages.
Marriages, yeah.
And actually, Sir Hardress's blood went into kind of a lot of the Irish and English nobility.
That is true. And the other half of he got kind of half the barony, and the other half then belonged to the Berries.
Yes.
Yeah, you can call it
That's
Berry
true.
or Berry. Yeah. There's different ways of pronouncing the name. Berries.
Well,
So in Tullamore they call it Burry.
Actually, the genealogical dictionary says that it's not the same pronunciation as the English town of Bury.
Bury St. Edmunds, yeah.
That it's supposed to rhyme with Drury. So Bury was the pronunciation of it.
Yeah, B-U-R-Y.
B-U-R-Y, correct.
But in Tullamore, where they eventually went to live, the key I know up there, anybody from Tullamore will tell you, they call it Burry Key. They call it Key.
Yes, right.
Yeah. And because they were one of the first big landowners to actually sell out of the Limerick estates and moved up to Tullamore.
That's correct. Yes.
In 1844, I think, they sold out.
That's right.
But like that, they had a fair amount, but they weren't soldiers as such. They were adventurers.
They were the original man
Yes.
helped to finance
Cromwell's army, yeah.
And he was very lucky because on the restoration of Charles II, in justice, he should have lost everything. But of course, he made another deal and he was confirmed in the land that he had. So he was pretty lucky there, he survived.
But have you any reason why two corners of the barony on east and west, to me, this is my reading of it, why was those two sold to the Westrops? On both ends of the barony, you had Mellon and you had Ballysteen House. How did Westrops get their paws on that, two corners of the barony?
I'll tell you now, the Westrops property in Ballysteen, when the original owners got into trouble, all the property was forfeited. Now it was forfeited to the Crown. That meant actually that it was actually in the possession of James II. It was in the possession of his daughter, Queen Anne. And it came down along until finally somebody said, money would be better to us than land in Ireland. So it was put up for sale. And in 1703, the Westrops had the money and they bought Ballysteen.
I realize that now, yeah. But what about Mellon there on the other side?
Well, I'll tell you now about Mellon. Both General, the man in Copswood and one of the Westrops served together in India.
Oh.
And when the Bury land came up for sale, the Westrop man who knew that because they already had property there, Westrop said that the land around the Shannon is not good, that there's much better land around around the Kenry. So what's his name again? The man in
Caulfield, is it? Caulfield?
Sorry?
Caulfield, was it? Or
No,
Caulfield. The fellow on Paliskenry.
College would belong to Caulfield.
Caulfield, yeah.
That's right, Caulfield, that's great.
Yeah.
So Caulfield, General Caulfield, he was James Caulfield, General James Caulfield, took that as being the truth, and he purchased Copswood and Paliskenry, about nearly 4,500 acres. Now, Mellon then was left, and the Westrops bought Mellon. Now, as it turned out, actually, the land in Mellon was much better than and Caulfield always resented the fact that really he was misguided. The advice wasn't great.
Yeah, yeah.
That man, just to throw in there, that man that bought Caulfield, I think it was his brother that built the casino at Marino in Dublin.
Yeah, it was the Caulfield family.
As opposed to the Marino in Casino. You get confused in that one. The Marino, the casino in Marino, which luckily stands with, that's a story for another day, you know. But Caulfield, he became the Earl of Charlemont.
That's correct.
Yeah. The Marino. But anyway, the Westrops were there for a long time. Do you remember old Philippa Westrop, who was in Ballysteen House?
I did. I often called to see her.
Did you? Yeah.
Yes. It was, and I had chats with her. One of the things, I was very keen to find if she had any records, you know, just to have a look at them. But one she showed me It was what they used to call long ago a day book, meaning every day there was an entry about anything that would happen.
Yeah.
But there were some amusing comments anyway. One of the comments was, so-and-so, I won't give the name, he was a local, is absent today. The wife says he's sick, but I don't believe it. I think he's drunk again.
I can well imagine it, you know. She lived in kind of dire circumstances in the end, didn't she?
She did. Well,
Yeah.
you see, one of the things, like kind of when I'd visit her, she'd speak about her friend. Now, her nearest friend was in Cork. In other words, they never made friends locally.
Mm-hmm.
And her mother was from Jamaica. I spent some time out in the Caribbean. And we'll say, the wife's father was the colonial secretary in Jamaica. And she was a kind of a daughter, and she came with a fortune. And the fact is, really, the Westrups, people like the Westrups, they needed cash. They had land, but cash was always short. Now, a very good example of the shortage of cash is, for instance, up in Rathkeil. There is what we regarded, the masses. We always regarded the masses as being wealthy.
Yeah.
Now, the masses, I found James is the present man, and now his dad was a very nice, welcoming man. And I called in to see him, and he gave me the records of the family.
Yeah.
Now, at one stage, for instance, there were 5 daughters, and it was they made marriage settlements long before the present kind of idea of having it. And the father, made arrangements that so much money, say £600, was to go at the first daughter, £500 was the marriage, dowry of the next one. But when you added that up, that was an enormous amount of money. And it actually, the man who inherited the property in the end, he had to borrow, to give out these dowries. So cash wasn't as plentiful as we might think.
Yeah. But in the Glens now, Tom, for example, United Glen, they would have mixed more with the locals, didn't they?
They did. Oh, they did.
Yeah, but I'll just tell you a story. The United Glen gave me an article he wrote one time, and he wrote in it, my nearest neighbours, the Leslies. So I said to him, you've just discounted about 500 people, So I said, there's a touch of that. But getting back to Philippa, can you tell us the story about the Catholic priest in the family?
I can, yes, right.
Yeah.
Now, that happened about 1850.
Yeah.
He wasn't a tenant of Westrups, actually, but he lived nearby. I won't mention the family because the family is still very prominent in Ballysteen.
Yeah.
But one of the Westrups fell in love with a very pretty girl from this family, and they married. Now, that was quite an embarrassment to the Westrup family, partly because it's difficult for us to understand it.
Oh, yeah.
It just wasn't done.
Well,
and it was a problem what to do with them. So they solved it by giving them about £400, and they headed off to the United States. And they went west and they bought an estate. And they lived very, very happily. But the son of that family Father Westrop joined the Jesuits, and he went to India, and he spent his life there. But he also had a little magazine to raise funds, and I was in touch with those, those Westrops. As far as I can see, the last one is died out or moved away from that place. But anyway, the story goes, and it was one of this family was telling me this. One day, that maybe 100 years later, or maybe 70 years later anyway, Edmund Westrop, who was Philippa's father, and like most of us at the time, he hadn't studied the family history, and he got a letter from this Father Westrop, who was in India asking for money. And he came out to this family and he said, "Do you know anything about this?" Because the priest had given the history that his father had married this local girl, and they settled and so on. And the father of the girl didn't know anything either. So, but anyway, eventually, I researched it, and I came across Father Westrop and his the little books he used to write.
But they were written out of history. I think he wasn't in the Westrop. Cork's peerage.
No. He's written out of it actually.
I met a relative of theirs from America. He was involved in banking in America, and he said that he didn't realize what line he came from. This particular man, his daughter was with him. And when the Westrops were over here in the year 2000, that was, and he said he didn't know. So I presumed he was from a branch. There's somebody, I checked the landed gentry, and there's one man that just disappears.
Yes,
and is he the man that either married the girl, or is he another one that went to America? I don't know.
Well, I couldn't say offhand.
Yeah. Also, Michael Westrop, who lives over in England, when he was here, he told me that Philippa, that most of the money that she had and that she was given was invested in war bonds.
Oh yes, it was. She told me that.
Of them wasn't worth talking about. The interest that she had. Was it land bonds or war bonds? One of them anyway.
Land bonds, because our congregation had them, and actually, eventually, I was the one responsible for disposing of them.
Yeah.
The interest at that, you see, was something like 1.5%.
Yeah.
2%, 2.25%. So when in the present day, it wasn't worth looking at.
Yeah. I remember him telling me
it didn't keep up with inflation.
Yeah, exactly. No.
And what Ballystine House? Sorry, Johnny. Ballystine House now is it? Are the people living in it?
Not permanently. It was built in 1800 by General John Westrop, who played a prominent part in the 1798 rebellion. It isn't very well known, but actually in recent times a letter has surfaced, a letter from Westrop to De Vere, And in the letter he says, "We hanged O'Neill from the bridge in Askeaton."
Oh.
Now, the general, he did serve in the army, but anybody for that period, they rounded up anybody with military, experience, and they promoted them. So Westrop anyway ended up like being a general. But The family actually were, I wouldn't say they were disliked in Ballysteen. They weren't large landowners, you see.
Yeah.
But that wasn't known because that is because O'Neill, as you know, Michael O'Neill, is very much reverenced around Skeeton and Ballysteen.
Yeah.
He was one of the few 1798 members of the United Irishmen that was registered as a member.
Yeah.
Where was he from? Was he from Skeeton?
He was with. Actually, I don't know if you know the road, what we would call the Ballynorth Road.
Oh, to Ballynorth, yeah.
Yeah, and that goes up to Skeeton, if you like, and ends up at the Four Roads. Now he lived in a farm along that road.
Isn't there a monument? There's a monument erected to him, isn't there?
Well, in the best cemetery, there is anywhere, you know.
Yeah.
And there might. Sorry.
Ballynorth, I was going to say, was originally massive property, wasn't it?
No, the Ballysteen. Well, actually, yes, they inherited some of it.
Yeah.
But the Ballynorth house, that goes back to Elizabethan times and to the kind of all the tailors came from there. And as you know, the tailors, there were two members of parliament for Skeeton, and tailors kind of owned those two seats.
Yeah.
And they sold them and gave them, you know, as they wished. And that went on until the Act of Union, and they were compensated actually for the seats eventually.
They were well compensated.
Yeah, well, they were indeed. But you're correct. Massey, one of the daughters, you see, married a Massey, and eventually the Masseys and the Earl of Carrick inherited all the Taylor property. And that O'Grady eventually kind of purchased, towards the end of the 19th century, he purchased the property, and he was the last owner of that property.
Because people often ask me, when you drive past the Coach Inn, let's say, right, where the big gates are, people think they're going into Chase. You think they were the gates belonging to Chase?
That's true.
No,
that was actually they were the tailors.
Tailors, yeah. You forget about
but they came from Ballynorth. One branch came over there.
Yeah.
And but there's a very good story, and this is true. The De Veres were neighbours, you know, to the tailors. Now, at one time, the tailors ran into financial difficulty, so they sold some of their property to the De Veres. Okay. And they went off to Australia and got into mining. And they were lucky, and they made quite a bit of money. So they came back, and this time the De Veres were running short of money. So the tailors bought back the land.
Yeah.
That was in 1836 they left. When did they come back?
Yeah,
they came back before 1900 anyway.
Yeah.
Incidentally, by the way, there was a piece of rock that fell from a comet. You know, it fell.
A meteorite.
A meteorite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It fell there.
Yeah, there's also meteorites fell on the Feheney estate in Patrick Swell.
Same one.
Yeah. We went up to Dublin to get them back to Limerick at the time. Those meteorites that fell in the.
It's the same. they're all the same. They're all the same meteorite. They fell in different places.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's a story that somebody tried to smash one with a hedge and a what you call this big hammer.
Mallet, sledge.
And it splintered, and it's reputed to have went into his eye when he tried to split it. It was so hard that he had a big hammer and tried to break it and couldn't break it. Just off, But anyway, that's another story. But getting back, John, your books, we're moving along in time. Your books, you did, what's the other ones there, Tom? You did, that's the history of Ballysteen. So just before we go on that, we have to mention Burl Ives. Burl Ives, the American actor. That's the Ballysteen one there, Tommy.
That's correct. Great.
But Burl Ives, which is in that book, he came to live at Prospect House, didn't he?
That's correct, yes. Now, Prospect House was a Waller house.
Waller house, yes.
And the amount of land was very small. In fact, actually, originally, the curate of Askeaton Ballysteen, that is not the Catholic curate now, the Church of Ireland curate, lived in Prospect. And it was a very suitable house, for a gentleman, shall we say.
Yeah.
And so Burl Ives, actually, the Sheehy brothers, you may have heard of those. At one time, they had
they did the demolition inside in Todd's. When Todd's was being demolished after the big fire, the Sheehy brothers got the contract for the...
Great.
Sorry, go on.
Exactly. Now, after the war, they got into demolition in England, and they made quite a bit of money. And then they came to Ireland. But anyway, they had a certain money, so they invested in land. And one of the things they purchased was that house, Prospect House. Now, Burl Ives was traveling around, and he went into the coach inn in Kilcorman. And at that time, it was owned by Peter Sheehy, one of the younger brothers. There was quite a big clan of the Sheehy brothers there. So he got talking about any house around. So Peter said, I have the perfect thing for you. They got into a car and they went down and had a look at the house, and he purchased it. Now, I have been there, and visited the house. It's a 19th century house, if you like, and therefore it wouldn't have the comforts that Burl Ives would like to have.
Yeah.
So Burl actually, he visited it, but it didn't meet his requirement. He went into a hotel in Limerick. It was more comfortable when he was around.
Yeah. Did he stay long there? He didn't seem to stay long, did he?
Well, he retained ownership until he died, and actually he then left it to his third wife. He had three. So the third wife got that, and then she sold it.
Yeah. And do you know, Tom, this Prospect House?
Oh, I know. We were there with Brother John. He talked to us.
The location of it is, there's a road to Beckcastle.
Yeah.
Well, there are two roads, but
yeah.
the most easterly road to Beckcastle, and it's just 100 yards down on the right.
Yeah. I know the house, But actually, you mentioned the Sheehy brothers there. Did they own I know it's out of your depth now, but it's a house on the line between Ferrybridge and...
Correct. They did, the line. They did. They owned that. There was another Westrup house,
That's it. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And the first one was in Dunas. And then they purchased Belial. And now, Belial, of course, looked very, very attractive, but it had the disadvantage of all gentry houses, and that is the estate was designed for an army of servants.
Mhm.
So therefore, one of the Sheehies, Paddy Sheehy, who became a TD later, and Paddy kind of was given that, it was allocated to him. I visited him several times there, but Paddy was trying to make a farm out of it. And all these kind of gentry estates needed a big input of cash to turn them into a modern day farm. There were huge, big fields. The land was rather flat,
very flat,
low-lying.
yeah.
Low-lying.
Yeah.
So it would be wonderful for a gentry house to be a wonderful parkland, but not so good when you wanted to feed a band of cows.
Yeah.
It's good, yeah. No, but it is, I've been in the house. It's a lovely house.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, a lovely house and a lovely avenue going into it.
That's so great.
You know, but anyway, that's just that. I didn't know that was a West Top house. I didn't realise that.
Well, the extended Westrup family, you know,
yeah.
there were many marriages, and but it was essentially kind of the extended Westrup family.
Yeah.
And John,
we get on to some of the other books, Tom.
Well, being a Christian brother, I suppose, like the good seed and fertile soil. Why did I know all of Ireland was produced priests and nuns, but West Limerick in particular, you know, and down your own territory, it was like there was families. Some families had 5 and 6 priests and nuns in them, like, you know. It was,
oh, yeah, great. I think, Tom, that history will look back on this as a phenomenon.
Yeah.
A strange phenomenon. If we think of throughout the history of Christendom, we had the Crusades were a phenomenon.
Yeah, yeah.
Just people got the idea.
Yeah.
So in the 19th century, especially, we'll say a little bit before that, from about 1850 onwards, we say to 1950, just the idea just spread. And you mentioned there, take for instance now the Cotters in Glenduff, in Ashford.
Yeah.
There were 6 girls in that family, and they joined a group, an Australian group called the Sisters of the Sacred Heart. Now, those girls were very able people.
Yeah.
When they got education, every one of them was head of something, a hospital or a convent. We'll take Kildimo. There's a place called Kilmoreen.
O'Shea's.
Yeah.
The O'Shea's was a huge thing.
Yeah.
But there was another family, they are now the McMahons. There were 6 of those girls joined the Mercy congregation in Australia, and every one of them was an able woman.
Yeah.
But the most striking of all, though, was in Cahercondish, the Kennedy family.
Oh, I know, yeah.
There were 8 girls. There were 8 girls became Mercy nuns, and 3 became priests.
Yeah.
And one a Jesuit, one became what was then known as the Far East. He used to write the Pudsey Ryan column.
Oh, yeah.
He started the Pudsey. They call them Columbans nowadays.
Yeah.
And then there was a 3rd one in Scotland. But anyway, 8 and 3, there were 11 altogether. Now there were only there were only 13 in the family.
Yeah.
So there were only 2 left.
You had to leave one for the farm.
One for the farm, and the other girl actually, she married, and she ended up actually, they owned what was the Coach Inn. Do you remember that Coach Inn?
The Coach Inn, yeah.
So they and then she purchased the place where the Kennedys now are, do you know?
Is it Cartown?
Gotcha.
Correct?
Yeah,
And it
Cartown,
was
yeah.
actually, she purchased that,
Was it?
and
Oh, yeah.
they inherited from her. She had no children.
Hmm.
Because there's a headstone above in Mount St. Lawrence, and it gives all the details of it's belonging to the Kennedys, and it gives all the details about the priests and the nuns on the headstone. I know what the
Exactly.
headstone is. I could find it now tomorrow about the Kennedys. And how they're buried in Mount St. Lawrence, I do not know. Why Mount St. Lawrence was buried
I
there?
could not say. I could not say.
But John,
But
Buried
have
there
you
with one
ever,
family.
have you
I
ever
know-
studied? Sorry, John.
Celtic, you know, anyway, but like that, sorry, Tom.
No, I was just going to ask John, have you ever studied the cost to a family of, you had to pay a dowry or a fee if a daughter joined a convent?
yes, yeah. Well, now the breakdown of that is, at that time there were what was known as lay sisters.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist now. What was the lay sister? So you had choir sisters and lay sisters.
Yeah.
Now the choir sisters got further education, and they qualified either as teachers or nurses and so on. If they didn't have a dowry, they became lay sisters. Now there was another factor as well. The missionary congregations who wanted girls to go abroad, they didn't ask for any dowries.
All right.
So the dowries were those what were known as the choir sisters, and the choir sisters were the ones who became the superiors.
Yeah. So if you wanted to make your way in a convent, you had to pay your dowry. And
exactly. If you paid the dowry. Now I must tell you a story about. This is a girl from back west, and she joined one of the congregations, the missionary congregations. She was sent to the States, and her job was to look after the laundry. Now it was a very big congregation, and they had rather what we would here regard as modern equipment. One of them was a ringer, or those things where you put in the sheet and you twisted it.
Mangle.
A mangler or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, while the choir sisters were in the chapel saying their office anyway, they heard a scream this morning. They ran out anyway, and in the laundry, here was our poor sister from West Limerick with her two hands stuck in the mangler.
Okay.
So anyway, the long and the short of it was her two hands had to be amputated at the wrist. And she still kept going for another 30 years, doing somehow, until finally anyway, the girls in the school made a collection and they purchased, artificial hands for. But it exemplifies the lay sisters did the work and polishing of the floor.
Yeah.
And how did you get involved with the presentation order?
Well, there were two presentation brothers from near me, and there were a couple also from Kildimo. And so they had a juniorate school, which really were secondary schools in Cork. So I attended their school in Cork. And I suppose at that time, it was after the war, it seemed a very attractive life. There were possibilities of going abroad, going in the missions. And number one, I suppose I liked the idea of going to college. The people who didn't go had the idea that we spent the day in football and hurling. So
you went to Trinidad, Tobago, Trinidad. Did you was in Trinidad?
That's true. Well,
Yeah.
that was I volunteered for that. Well, to be candid, I was keen, on seeing the world.
Mm.
So I spent 16 years out there. Now, I got to like it very much, and I wrote actually 2 books about the history of education in Trinidad. At that time, it was a British colony,
Yes.
but while I was there, it then became independent, and now it has a representative in the United Nations. All those little countries have a representative in the United Nations. One representative, the same as the United States, has only one representative too.
Yeah.
And Tobago, isn't it? Tobago's the other island, is it?
Tobago is, Tobago is the smaller one, less developed, but possibly better for holidays. The beaches are possibly better there.
Yeah. And just explain about the difference between the Presentation Order and the Christian Brother Order.
Correct. Well, Edmund Rice, when he founded the congregation, he founded the Presentation Order. Now, and that went on for maybe 20 years. But there was one disadvantage with the arrangement of that order, and that was it was subject, each house was subject to the local bishop. And for instance, if you wanted to send a brother from Limerick to Cork, you couldn't do it until the bishop kind of agreed. And naturally, bishops became very possessive. Mm-hmm. So kind of problems presented themselves as soon as the order got a bit bigger. The bishops kept interfering. So Brother Rice then decided to bring in a new style of government where it would come directly under Rome and would be independent of the bishop. And when that was reorganized, he called it the new arrangement, the Christian Brothers. Now, it so happened that there was a bishop, one of our brothers in Cork was an architect, and he was working for the Bishop of Cork at the time, whose name was Murphy. They were the Murphys, the Brewer Murphys, and they're still actually in action, Murphy Stout.
Yes, yes, yes.
And that bishop had a great hold on this man. And he asked him, kind of, do not leave me, stay with me, and I will look after you. So he remained, and he retained the name Presentation Brother, and actually I belong to that part. Now, looking back on it, the new idea of being under Rome was far better, because bishops, as I said, became very possessive, and it was very difficult to move somebody from one county to another county, and one diocese to another. But we work together nowadays, Christian Brothers and the Presentation.
Yeah. So, are you answerable to the Bishop of Cork? So.
No. Kind of insofar as you are answerable, I am the same way. But we have what we call our leader, and he is directly responsible to Rome.
Oh, yeah.
Correct.
And John, lots of people when we have guests on ask, where can I get his books? You have the Ivorous website, have you?
I have, but
Ivorous Research.
Yes, actually, all the books are sold.
All right.
At this stage, really.
Yeah. Well, that's
I haven't gone into second editions.
Yeah. Some of them are available online, are they?
There's just a couple. There's just a small number of copies left.
Are some of them available online?
just a few.
Yeah, but are some of the books online? Do you have some of the books up online on the web?
Actually, I don't know. You see, there's only, I have only 2 books online.
Oh, yeah.
Those are separate. Yeah. One is my own autobiography, and the other is a biographical dictionary of Lower Canelo.
Yeah.
Now I have another one to go online, a biographical dictionary of Upper Canelo. Yeah. And that would go up as far as Brewery.
Yeah.
Lower Canelo would go as far as Rathkeale.
Yeah.
So, but I'd say, John, if somebody put your name in, John M. Feheney, into Google or into something will come up.
All you would have to put in is Feheney, actually.
Oh, Feheney, yeah.
If you put that in, well, in addition to the books, you see, I have published a lot of articles. And also I was a reviewer for Books Ireland of local history for several years. So actually on the World Catalogue, you'll find there's a thing called the World Catalogue of Books. There are 67 entries. The University of Oxford has 34 of those. But as I said, I haven't gone into the book selling business really.
Yeah.
That's a business in itself.
It is. Oh yeah.
It's like your story, Tom, that we've agreed on. If somebody wants to know about a reprint, ask them for the money and back off, as they say. It's a great task for a second printing, you know. But who's going to pay for it, you know?
Yeah.
John, we're talking over an hour. And did you know there's so many things I haven't even discussed with you that's gone through my head now that I could be asking you not till doomsday, but another good hour, you know. We'll have to do another program. The next time we do a program, John, I better have proper notes. I have no notes in front of me. And I'd want to stick to the notes. Would you agree, Tom? We're not the rambling around there from Color. We didn't talk about Color Chase. That didn't even come into the equation. And there's lots of other places. We never mentioned the Salesians who own Copsewood now, as we know it. Yeah. And there's so many other houses around there. Incidentally, Ballysteen House was left to 3 brothers.
That's correct.
I remember getting permission from one of
them. They would be nephews of Philippa.
Philippa, yeah. And I think there were 2 of them in Dublin, and one of them was in Dublin. I spoke to one of them, I forget now. And but like that, it's a pity that one of them didn't come to live there, you know, in the house. I suppose they're just not interested, you know.
Well, as I said, they are 19th century houses. And to modernize them, there would be quite an expenditure.
Oh, yeah. Well, there are 2 things you need for the old house. You need the will to do it, and you need the money. No, people say that to me. Would you like to be left a big house? No, I say, you know. Who's going, and how are you going to heat it?
Exactly. Correct.
You know, because your place. I should tell people, Brother John Feheney is a brother of the presentation order, and you're based at Maldyke House, which I passed many a time, passing Cork, you know. A lovely spot you're in there. It's a nice spot.
It is. By the way, I myself, before we conclude, I want to say a thanks to you and to Tom. And I'd say about one thing about you, Tony, that you are one of the real, genuine people who are genuinely interested in local history and family history. And Tom also, you're 2 dedicated members. And on behalf of the people in Limerick who are interested in this area, I think you should be thanked, both of you. Thank you.
But the only thing, thank you, John, but the only thing is Tom I'm sure would agree with me, it's not helped, you know, there's very few interests. You know, it's a bit
like what we said earlier about the pioneer badge. You know, the 3 of us are pioneers, and it's a dying It's true.
It is.
It is. Really. But I do blame, I can say this now, I blame the schools for both the pioneer pin and for local history. That the interest isn't there with the teachers. That when I was going to school, you heard about the pioneer pin. You obviously were preparing for confirmation, and the pledge was the big thing that was coming up. But that's completely forgotten about. And so is local history for that matter. So where do you go from that?
Yeah,
More people like you and Tom.
Yeah.
I don't know, John. I don't know. You're flogging a dead horse half the time. It's a terrible expression, but it's true. It's depressing. And if people would really read more history books, to make a big difference.
Yeah.
As Father John says, like the Crusades, they might it might become fashionable again, history and pioneer.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
I wonder.
Yeah.
Anyway, first of all, thank Tom for coming on.
Thanks, John. Pleasure.
I really mean it. Thank you very much, John. And I can't express my regard for you. And we'll have to do another program again. But the next time, I'll have my notes properly written out. So we'll stick to something in particular, like Ballysteen, like Askeaton, which we haven't touched on, and Kildare, that general area. So again, John, thank you very much for coming on tonight, okay?
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And thank you, Tom, also.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
God bless.
Okay, John, good luck.
Thank you.